Hi everyone, good evening, welcome. I don't want to delay the proceedings too much. I've just got 3 or 4 things I need to say. My name's Isabel Whiteleg, I'm the Curator of Public Programmes here at Nottingham Contemporary. First of all, I would like to say a very warm welcome to Melinda Gebbie and Alan Moore. Thank you very much for being here this evening. And welcome also to all of you in the audience. It's very nice to see you all here. I'm glad we've managed to fit you all in. The final thing I need to say is a huge thank you to my collaborator in this enterprise, Matt Green, who's an Associate Professor of English at the University of Nottingham. It was really thanks to conversations with him that we came up with the idea of inviting Melinda and Alan here this evening. So many, many thanks to Matt, many thanks to Melinda, and many thanks to Alan, and thanks to all of you. Thanks very much. Bye.
Okay, yes, so as Isabel said, my name's Matt Green, and I just wanted to start the evening off really with a very, very brief introduction to some of the lesser-known works that Alan and Melinda have been involved in over the years, and works that I think really do draw together some of the themes that you'll find from the exhibition galleries upstairs. So you'll have guessed, no doubt, by now, looking at the earlier slideshow and listening to some of the music, that we won't just be focusing on comics. And nor need our conversations necessarily be restricted to visual and verbal media. In fact, the music that was playing as you came in is but a brief survey of Alan's forays into the performance arts, many of which have recently come under the banner of the imaginary magical troupe, the Moon and Serpent Grand Egyptian Theatre of Marvels, in which Melinda has also been an active participant. So perhaps Alan and Melinda's best-known collaboration is on the gorgeously illustrated and very intricately crafted Lost Girls, which rereads Alice in Wonderland, Peter Pan, and The Wizard of Oz in the context of adult sexual awareness. It presents a meditation on the pleasures and traumas of sexuality and explores the ways in which what we think of as the real world relates to art and to literature. Of specific reference of specific relevance to Mika Rottenberg's work, Lost Girls presents the female body, and indeed the male body too, in a wide variety of forms. And in relation to both Rottenberg and Gilray, Lost Girls also comments directly on the broader social and political themes, linking the repression of sexuality to violence and military conflict. So with these last 2 images up on the screen, we're reminded that the body is both a site for pleasure and expression, and delving into, I suppose, modes of being and imagining ourselves that go beyond the everyday. But the body also represents that precarious border on which the desires and the will of others can be violently inscribed. The link between art, and specifically comics art, and politics has long been a staple of the underground press, of course, a phenomenon that Alan has recently revived in the underground magazine Dodgem Logic, to which Melinda is a regular contributor, both as a visual artist but also as a columnist and writer. And each issue combines political commentary with a variety of comics, including this one, which you will have seen earlier, which I believe I'm right in saying is the only comic so far in existence that Alan has both drawn and written himself. I think the blurb in Dodgem Logic says, "And now you know why." But hopefully we will be seeing more of these creative outputs in the future. It's actually a very exciting piece, so I would recommend that you look it up in Dodgem Logic. There are more exciting scenes than I felt might necessarily be appropriate in a public venue. So do go and have a look. And also, there's each issue has a variety of different artistic contributions, be they kind of paintings or drawings, or indeed photography. Now, Alan and Melinda both have a long-standing history of working on comics that explicitly seek not only to comment on, but also to intervene in political and cultural contexts. And in this way, their work is also akin to that of Gilray and Rottenberg. Melinda, for example, contributed to the charity anthology Strip Aids in 1987. And Alan, I think it was in 1988 or 1989, also wrote a docudrama in comic form, exploring the shady history of the US foreign policy that led up to the Iran-Contra scandal in the mid-1980s. And he was also responsible for publishing the anthology Artists Against Rampant Government Homophobia, or ARG, which was written specifically in response to the infamous Clause 28, which prohibited, as I'm sure many of you know, prohibited local authorities from doing anything that might be perceived as promoting homosexuality, and which labeled gay relationships as quote-unquote pretend. And Melinda also, as I say, has a long history with the underground and with activist comics. And her early works, like Fresca-Zizis, also explored various facets of human sexuality. Specifically working to counteract myths about women's sexuality and about sexual experiences prevalent within both the mainstream and various countercultures. This early work drew extensively on her own experience and observations, and that's something which has continued up to the present and has informed her current work, which I'm reliably informed has just been completed on her own autobiography. So in summing up then, Melinda and Alan's art and writing is both informed by and informs the wider world. As you'll have seen, the body, what it does and what it has done, or what it can do and has done to it, is a key theme across their work. So theirs is work that literally runs out of the frame, through the gutter and off the page in its attempt to express their vision and experience, and in so doing, their work seeks to make our world a better place. So without further ado, I'll move back over to the table over there, and we can begin our conversation. That's very right, isn't it? Yeah, okay.
We looked a lot prettier a few moments ago, didn't we?
Yeah, we did. We like it better in the half dark.
It's that thing, you know, the kind of sublime effect of a little bit of darkness and shadow.
Prettier and younger.
Well, I guess one way of kind of starting off would be to think a little bit more about that relationship between art and politics. So I was wondering if either of you wants to kind of get the ball rolling by just talking a little bit about how you think your own work relates to kind of the current political climate.
Well, I mean, I'd say that I heard someone talking about stand-up comedy, and they were saying that stand-up comedians were the secret legislators of our times, which they probably could have come up with better legislation, that being the case. But as a general idea, I think there's a lot of truth in that. And I think that it doesn't just apply to stand-up comedy, I think that it applies to art in general. And indeed, that might be what art is for. Or art is for many things, but it may be that we need art to constantly keep commenting upon our own cultural progress, upon our own emotional or intellectual progress. We need art as a way of talking about where we are, even spiritually, if you like, where we are in terms of our world and our place in it. That is probably what keeps culture moving forwards. I'm not sure where the Brit art movement actually fits into that, but it was a pretty compelling theory until I got to that bit. But no, I think that generally that's what art is for. What it's all about, what it's probably been about since Paleolithic times. That it's a way of revising our ideas about ourselves and thus keeping them moving, you know. So, at least.
I think one of the problems with the modern Brit art movement and everything that is kind of promoted by big businesses, that doesn't serve the needs of actually moving culture forward, because it's a marriage between, you know, profit-based instincts and people who want to join profit-based instincts. So you're not going to get the truth, because the truth kind of stands alone. It's not the job of the artist to be rich, it's the job of the artist to look at what's going on and to be truthful. Sometimes you can get rewarded for that, but that shouldn't be the reason you do it. And also I think, well, I don't know, I could go on all evening about what I think of the modern Brit artists who don't know anatomy and can't stretch their own canvases, can't build their own sculptures, can't even draw even the most simple pictures, and have no ideas whatsoever. And we have a very dear friend, Brian Catling, who's a very gifted sculptor. And he has students who come to him. He says, if they wanted anything, I would help them build anything. But they come to me and they say, make me rich. Introduce me to Tracy Emin. Introduce me to Charles Saatchi. You know, they're not talking about ideas anymore. They're not talking about how do I discuss through my art my feelings about how we are imprisoned by the media, how we are imprisoned by the fears that we have to deal with, the governmental issues that are going on in the world, our lacks of freedom, you know, the enforced idea of young people being thrown into war and coming back in pieces. How do I look at the serious issues of being alive? You know, we don't get paid for that. It is a calling, it is not a high-paying job.
Yeah, I'd agree with everything that Melinda's just said, and I'd also say that the thing that, I mean, that this all hinges upon Charles Saatchi is kind of emblematic, really, isn't it? I mean, he first came to our attention when he was selling us Margaret Thatcher, and it's just kind of gone downhill from there, really, hasn't it? But, I mean, what they have done is to make art a commodity, and art is not a commodity. Art should be an explosive substance that changes the world. I have been recently doing a piece for Occupy Comics, which is largely a history of the comic book medium, but this again applies to an awful lot of arts. I've suggested that radical and revolutionary elements in comic strips are not an aberration. They are what comic strips are for. That since their inception, comic strips have been scandalous, scurrilous, generally aimed at the illiterate lower orders, or at least that was the perception, that since 17th century Italy, when people were drawing political caricatures on the side of cardboard boxes or cartons, we have had the word cartoon. It started politically, and again, I think this is true of all of the arts. If they're not engaged, if they're not about upsetting you in some way, and I know that sounds harsh and confrontational, but if art doesn't surprise you, then all it is doing is reassuring you and reconfirming your prejudices. Most popular culture is, or a lot of it, is saying everything's okay. Everything's okay with the way that you think about things, with the way that you see the world. Everything's okay. Isn't it nice? look, a butterfly. Whereas what art should do is, it's a way of talking without language. It's a way of speaking almost directly, heart to heart, mind to mind. That it's a way of combating loneliness. That all of us can think that we are isolated, that, oh, it's only me who thinks these things, it's only me who feels these things, it's only me who has ideas like that, there must be something wrong with me. Then you see a piece of art and it makes you less alone. It makes you realise, hey, somebody else had that idea which I almost had but couldn't express that well, or it's a thing that connects human beings. That's what art's for. It's not there as a commodity and something to bring in huge amounts of money that are as inflated as most football players' wages. It's a similar thing, and that's not what art is for.
Yeah, I mean, it's I guess one of the things about comics is that they're often, or at least they used to be, often described as kind of commodities in themselves. And that was one way of speaking about kind of denigrating the comic as a form, as, okay, well, it's cheap, it's throwaway. But actually, it can be a way of reaching quite a broad audience.
It's a very democratic medium.
Yeah.
It is throwaway, much like a message in a bottle is throwaway. But you don't bother putting a high-paying salary quote in a message in a bottle, going, I hope somebody finds this and realizes how well I live.
Yeah,
you know?
I mean, like I don't know, the whole thing is sort of, we've kind of inverted an awful lot of our values in the present day. I mean, one of the beauties of comics is that it is a gutter medium. Mm-hmm. Yes, when they started bringing out graphic novels and started to actually lavish some production values upon these things, yes, it did turn our heads, and there's certainly no reason why a deserving book shouldn't have that kind of incredible quality. But I would hate to see the gutter quality of comics completely lost. I mean, comics used to be for children. That's why they weren't really being policed. That's why we could get away with so much. Because, well, by the time we entered, they were no longer really for children. They were being aimed at much older people. But there's something so compelling about the language of comics and the fact that they are despised. The fact that originally they were seen as being entertainment for the lower classes who probably couldn't read and who needed pictures to go along with the stories. That's why comics have been ignored, and that's why in the 1980s it was actually possible to make such incredible leaps and bounds, because the medium had hardly been touched. Yes, there had been some fantastic practitioners since the beginning of the 20th century. The American newspaper strip cartoonists, the underground cartoonists. There'd been some wonderful things done. But even so, for a whole art form, the ground had barely been scratched, because it was a despised art form. And that's what gives it, I think, its incredible power.
It's for the disenfranchised, the politically, the socially, the personally, the economically disenfranchised. It's a voice for people who have no voice. When art is the voice of the rich, then it has no meaning at all, because it's just pampering and flattering itself. It will always continue to be the voice of the disenfranchised. And I think there is still a huge amount of material that I'm really hoping to see come out of people who are genuinely disenfranchised, who have not had proper educations, who have a torn up home life, if any, and can come to comics and with simple language tell a profoundly deep and moving story, because these people are invisible in society. As we become more and more pushed down into statistical layers, we have to fight more and more to remind each other of our worth and our stories and our unifying factors in the face of everything that's happening. Now is a great challenge and a great time for the voices of the disenfranchised to come forth and tell their stories. You only need a few pens, a few pencils, some paper, and a box to draw on.
This is it. I mean, the thing is that it's not just, it wouldn't just be nice if art was a bit less about commerce and a bit more about real issues. I think it's necessary. The times that we're entering into, we are breaching a threshold of complexity that is much greater than any that we've faced before. It's liable, as I understand things, that in probably the next 18 months, we will probably invent as many things as we have previously invented in the whole of human history. And then in the year after that, or the 6 months after that, or the 3 months after that, if the graph holds up, I believe there's a point in around about 2017 when we are duplicating the amount of knowledge that we have attained in the previous whole of human history every fraction of a second. That's if the graph holds up. The times that we are going through now are more complex, and people feel more fragmented in terms of their personalities, in terms of their lives. The complexity keeps mounting. We need art more than ever. We need voices that can actually make some sense out of this chaotic storm of information that we find ourselves surrounded by. So, yes, it's not just that it would be preferable if we had some decent, committed art around at the moment. It's absolutely vital, or at least I believe so.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that kind of comes back to what you've spoken about in the past, about the idea of kind of radical art being linked to some sort of kind of a magical practice and a magical kind of intervention, in that it's about reshaping the world, or kind of it's more fundamental than economics or politics in some ways, because it's about redesigning the way we think about the world and kind of intervening in those social discourses that actually contribute to our understanding of the world.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that that's an important point, because back in the past, the remote past, there was a thing called the bardic tradition of magic. This was entirely based, it was like most magic, it was entirely literary or linguistic. Magic is largely a matter of language, but in the bardic tradition, it was okay if just some local wizard put a curse on you, because that would just make your hens lay funny, or something like that. You'd have a calf with a club foot, or, not a big deal. If a bard laid a satire on you, then that was the most terrifying thing conceivable, because even after you were dead, if it was a good enough satire, people would still be laughing at you. It was a fate more terrible than death. It could destroy your reputation, the reputation of your family. What I'm getting at here is that people used to be terrified of artists. And I personally think it would be good if we brought back those times. Well, no, not just because that would mean that I was worshipped as a god. Although though. but mainly because artists they'd have a better self-image. They wouldn't just feel that they were lucky to be in work. They wouldn't grovel before the people who are paying them money and refuse to ever make any kind of stand because, oh, well, I've got a family to support, I don't want to lose my job. If artists actually remembered the power that they used to have, then I think that if they treated their art as if it were magic, you don't have to believe that magic actually exists. If they treated it as if it were magic, if they gave their creativity the respect that they would give a god,
Or
then...
even a plumber.
Sorry?
Or even a plumber.
Or even a plumber, yeah. Then I think that it would solve a lot of the problems in modern art if they were to regard it as magic. I also think it would solve a lot of the problems in modern magic if they were to regard it as art. It's a win-win situation.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. That satirical element is something that is very prevalent in the Gilray and in a lot of comic art.
Absolutely.
And one of the ways that really works is on kind of a visual level is the representations of the body. And so I know that in a lot of the images that we've seen, the body takes kind of center stage. And so do you feel that the body is something which is really a kind of an important site for kind of re-examining who we are and kind of making those sorts of kind of personal and social interventions that we've been talking about?
I do. I mean, I think we feel as lost in our bodies as we do in our minds and as we do in the world. We've lost track of how to nourish ourselves. We need comfort. We look to the food that tastes nice to us for comfort, but it's not good for us. We're hungry a couple of hours later. We eat late at night. We're generally, I think, as human beings, anxious. We're not sure why. We feel a bit under attack. We want some kind of mother food. We want some hearth that revivifies us, that reassures us, that helps us feel whole again, that reminds us that we have strengths and that we have the ability to find what we need in community. And I think all of us feel more lost generally. I think, okay, we've got the Olympics coming up. We've got athletes who are making themselves sick several times a week, running too hard. Dancers live on, balls of cotton and chain smoking. People who stay thin are suffering just as well as people who are feeding themselves with the chemicals that look pretty. We are lost in all sorts of ways, and we need unifying symbols. We've always, as human beings, needed unifying archetypal symbols, which is where magic and art as connected things come in, because they're social meditations.
Well, also we've got a situation currently where, as Melinda says, we are in some ways divorced from our bodies. Most of our experience increasingly is virtual. Our bodies are not really required other than to, open another tin of Pringles once in a while. But otherwise, if we've just got the screen, then we can carry out an awful lot of our work and an awful lot of our leisure in a completely virtual environment. And in the way that we think about our bodies, of course, we might be plagued by health concerns because our bodies are the wrong shape and something like that. Or we may be thinking about our bodies, are they adequate for the kind of sexualised world that we exist in at the moment? We've got a lot of issues regarding our bodies. We tend to we don't like to think about them, really. Sometimes we like to think about other people's, but we don't like to think about our own. And something like with Lost Girls, I mean, what it's about is that people apparently have these things called genitals, and that sometimes they can kind of come up with interesting configurations that feel quite pleasant too. That is kind of what's been going on for a few million years now. You would have thought that we might be used to the concept, but
we're still not comfortable with
we're
it,
still
are
not
we?
we bring out something like Lost Girls, which is just about the way that we all got here. The way that humanity actually arrived at this place where we can publish beautifully illustrated porn books. It's all through sex, and yet this is something which we still cannot talk about, even though we can talk about in great detail all of the various messy ways that there are of leaving the world. We are not really allowed to talk about the quite commonplace and quite pleasurable mechanism by which people come into the world. I think that, you know, with Lost Girls, that was one of the main things, to just, let's present this beautifully so that people can't just dismiss it. And let's kind of put this on the menu. This is sexual activity. It's imaginary sexual activity, but it is sexual activity nonetheless. What is wrong with it? And we didn't actually receive much more than an ongoing silence in answer to that question, because actually there isn't anything wrong with it. It's something which causes us to examine the ways that we've been alienated from our own bodies and from our own sexuality.
Yeah, I mean, I guess one of the things that strikes me about Lost Girls is that although it's very much presented as pornography, it's of a completely different order in some ways than the kind of the hypersexualization of culture that we see around us. So, you know, I'm standing in line at the co-op and seeing magazines of Nuts and Zoom and all of this stuff, and thinking, right, okay, well, so this is all just kind of on display. Lost Girls isn't doing the same sort of thing. So I wonder if that's kind of a sense that you share. I mean, is one of the things that Lost Girls doing, trying to kind of claim back, I guess, sex and pornography from something that you see as detached from sexuality? Or?
Yeah, I think so. Would you want?
Well, I think the thing is like knowing that most of us, I believe, from what I've gathered from my friends over the years, men and women, everybody's a little bit shy physically, actually. I mean, all the pornography that we watch, well, these are actors who knows how they feel, but they're able to function. I mean, I have met a certain amount of people who are in the racket of pornography, and they're very strong human beings. They're very brave. I don't know how much fun it's been for them. You know, sometimes it's kind of nightmarish, you know. But whatever you see on camera is not necessarily what people feel. Very few people are, you know, unaffected exhibitionists. And one of the things that's also, you know, been very crucial to my whole life as a sexual being has been a kind of a deep self-consciousness sexually, which I think most of the women that I know and men who I've asked, I mean, everybody's a bit concerned about whether they'll be rejected when they're in their most vulnerable state, unless they're a practicing sort of narcissist who just parades around. Most people are not like that. I mean, I made Cobweb an exhibitionist because I thought how wonderful to be like her and just walk around. Who knows whether she's wearing underwear? She doesn't care, you know. But most people are not like that. And the invisible veil that actually makes us shy is part of the whole sexual arena. So that's one reason it took so long to do the book, because it's about the female imagination. It's about imagining a situation where everything is perfect, nothing can go wrong, at least in the good parts, in the lovely parts, where no one's being humiliated, no one's being rejected, no one's having a frightening situation happen to them. There are chapters like that in there because sexuality is dark as well. But it's with the understanding that actually people are quite delicate when it comes to their sexuality. If their personhood is involved, if they're actually genuinely attracted to the other person and they're hoping that something lovely will happen, then they are very vulnerable. And that is not the same thing as what we would call average pornography, where people are in some kind of sexual bull ring. The hot lights are on them. They've got a fluffer off stage. The young lady or the young man who comes in, who knows what's going on in their mind? I've got to go home. I'm a single parent. I've got to feed my baby. I better look like I'm enjoying this. And actually, it can be quite trying as a job. Nothing like what it looks like.
I mean, one of the things that, yes, it was an attempt to reclaim pornography. The way that I saw pornography functioning in the modern world, particularly in America and England, and a lot of other countries, it's that it's actually reinforcing our sense of shame. This is not the same as it is all over the world. In countries like Spain and Denmark and Holland, they have, of course, there's the internet, which is all over the world. They get exactly the same pornography that we're exposed to. However, they have a different attitude to it. It is not socially shaming. It is not in any way going to be a stigma if you are reading pornography. It's just something that these books are available in ordinary newsagents. Nobody pays them any attention. The difference is between the two cultures is that in places like Spain, Denmark and Holland, they don't get anything like the amount of sex crime, particularly sex crime against children, that we get over here. Now, why should that be? It seems to me that what we are doing is, I think we live in an incredibly sexualised society where sex is being used to sell us everything from chocolates to insurance, where we have, all right, this was 10, 15, 20 years ago, but where you'd have the Spice Girls convincing every 10-year-old girl in the country that they really wanted to zig ha and perhaps have a belly button ring, sexualising children younger and younger. We are bombarded by sexual signals every moment of our lives. It's a bit like being in one of those B.F. Skinner rat experiments where, but it's been wired up differently. So that, all right, you're living in a hypersexualised society, you're becoming hyperstimulated just going to the shops and passing by 2 or 3 billboards or advertisements. So probably most people, that would be around about the point when they'd perhaps reached for the pornography to provide some little bit of relief for their state of hyperstimulation. Now the thing is, that's like the rat pressing the lever to get its reward. Its little ration of sugar or whatever. The thing is, the way that this rat box has been wired up is that the moment the person gets their reward, if you like, from reading the pornography, they will immediately be visited by a feeling of shame and guilt and wretchedness and possibly even self-loathing. It's a bit like once the rat has pressed the reward lever, it gets the reward, it immediately gets a really painful electric shock. Now, if you were to do that to real rats, I imagine that a certain percentage of them would go mad. That's not the way it's supposed to work. If the thing that gives you pleasure also fills you with loathing, gives you pain, then I should imagine that there would be some people who would retreat. They think, well, all right, I'm filthy and loathsome already. Nobody must ever know how filthy and loathsome I am to have these thoughts. And they retreat into darker and darker corners, and they possibly become more and more pathological. And eventually they think, well, I wouldn't feel any worse if I were to actually do this for real, would I? And that's when you get monstrous things happening. We're keeping a lid upon a pressure cooker that has got a safety valve, famously, that safety valve being pornography, but where we have, for some reason, we've discarded the safety valve. So we just keep the lid on the pressure cooker, and if it blows up once in a while, and if people get injured, hey, that's just tough luck, really. At least we haven't had to talk about anything embarrassing. Those are my feelings.
Yeah, I mean, I think I remember you saying, having a conversation, was it in, was the soap place, is it Lush? With a mother, a grandmother and a daughter?
It was in Cafe Nero. Why not Cafe Caligula? I often wonder. I was in there, and I do go into Lush quite a bit because there's just something about a bath of glitter. You feel like you're in the 1970s. But I was one of the young women that I knew from Lush. She was in Cafe Nero with her mother. And they said, oh, we've just been and bought Lost Girls. And I said, oh, well, I'm really glad. And her mother said, oh, that is a lovely book. And I said, oh, well, thank you, I really enjoyed it. She said, oh, I thought that the artwork was beautiful and it was just written so well. And I thought, well, this is unusual. I'm having a sort of transgenerational conversation about pornography in Cafe Nero, and I don't feel at all weird. Which is partly what we were hoping for. All right, Lost Girls is one book. And also, if we're being absolutely honest about it, I mean, me and Melinda, all the way through doing Lost Girls, we were hoping that this would open a floodgate of new approaches to erotica and pornography.
I wanted women to like it. I wanted women to. I from the time I first got involved in underground comics, some of the best male humorists in the field, and we used to go to San Diego. I don't know how many of you know about the whole comics convention racket, but San Diego now is a place where there are film rights fought over. It's a massive series of connecting buildings, and it's huge and it's completely overwhelming. When I used to go many years ago, it was just a few comics people, us underground comics cartoonists had a little table. We were the delinquents. And Dan O'Neill, who did the Air Pirates and got prosecuted by Disney, he was there getting drunk playing his guitar. We went nude skinny dipping in the swimming pool. You know, we had a great old time. Very, very different then. Now it's all big time. What was my point now? Shit, I got stuck back there with Dan and his guitar, and
But yeah, have a think. I was just going to say that. What was my point? It's our age, you know. But
senior moment, darling.
With regard to the floodgates, yes, that's right. We thought that there'd be. Thank you very, very much. Could I hire you professionally?
Yes, yeah.
But, we thought it would open the floodgates of a new approach to pornography and a better world. And
better world for women. That was it.
Yeah, a better world for women.
That was it.
A better world for everyone. But then about as we got towards the end,
try and keep the thought here.
I thought, I really do. I remember this is what I said about superheroes with Watchmen, and we did have, if we're honest, who is going to spend 18 years doing a lavish pornography? It's more or less, it's a tombstone.
I'll tell you why I did that. This is why I started telling you about San Diego, because that's where greats of the field, like Harvey Kurtzman, huge hero to me, Mad Magazine, everything he did. He and some other cartoonists like Mort Drucker and some other people who had comics in the regular funny pages in California and were considered funny and very successful. And they'd have these panel discussions in the old days of San Diego, and they'd talk about how women had no sense of humor and they had no visible sex drive. And I remember standing up in the audience and saying, how can you say that? Are you married to your mother? What is going on? You think women just sit around and have tea parties and that's their life? You know, and they look quite surprised, like, you know, who's that? And that's why I took 16 years, because I wanted it to work. I wanted it to prove to, of course, Harvey's passed away now, but it didn't matter. My sense of revenge knew no bounds. I was determined to prove that there was a kind of book about pornography that could appeal to women. The only problem was that pornography as it stood was nasty, poorly produced, unattractive to look at, and frankly the women looked like cold, frightened chickens with stilettos on in most of these magazines, with their legs spread to an impossible depth and their makeup smeared. And I felt sorry for them and I identified with them. And I have since talked to some journalists, primarily some women journalists, who have agreed with me wholeheartedly about the difference between male-produced and female-produced pornography. There is a difference.
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking for some years about how I might approach the idea of a completely sexual work. Because, I mean, yes, I'd had sort of sexual episodes in a lot of my work where it was appropriate, but I thought, well, why couldn't you do a whole book about that? I mean, people do whole books about violence all the time. Why couldn't you do a whole thing about sex? And it wasn't until I was actually, the idea of working with a woman had not occurred to me. That was because the number of women that were allowed into the comics industry, I don't know whether it was slightly more than the number of black people who are allowed into the comics industry, but it was around that kind of negligible level. Once the possibility, the idea of working with Melinda had arisen, then that suddenly solved all the problems, because it wouldn't just be the kind of locker room sexuality that you'd expect if it was two guys, with the best will in the world, if it was two guys doing it. But, you know, like I say, I doubt that there's going to be a wave of material in the wake of Lost Girls. What we might have done is scare people off of attempting it for a few years. You know, it's just the way that these things work out.
Yeah. I mean, I guess one of the things that you've both kind of commented on is the kind of desire to make the world a better place for everybody, but also for women specifically. And I think one of the things we were talking about before we came out here was something like From Hell, and how it has a very strong kind of almost a feminist kind of subtext or politics informing it.
Well, that was the idea. I mean, if you're going to be talking about Jack the Ripper and you don't want to just make it another slasher movie, then you have to start thinking about those issues. I think that one of the things with From Hell was that it was the actual first piece of Ripper fiction that had actually bothered to find out about these women who were just regarded as Ripper fodder. They didn't have names, backgrounds or anything, you know. So, I mean, I wouldn't want to make huge claims for From Hell, but that was one of the subtexts. And like with Lost Girls, yeah, it's not... Doing a pornography that will appeal to men is really, really not rocket science. You know, it's... whereas doing a pornography that will appeal to women, because it's not been attempted very often, is more difficult. We wanted to do something that would appeal to both, but yeah, if you make it appeal to women, like I say, like Charlie Brooker once said, a man can be aroused by a drawing in chalk of a single boob on the side of a shed. Which is tragic, but probably true. So you don't really have to worry about the male audience. But you know, with Melinda, there was this possibility for actually thinking, all right, so every scene that I'd come up with, I'd sound it out with Melinda. She'd sometimes say, oh, I don't like that, or I think that's a bit far. Or sometimes she'd sort of suggest that we take things further in certain areas. And it was great to have that kind of sounding board and barometer so that we could try and make sure that the characters were never disrespected, no matter how ignominious the sexual positions that they were in. We were treating those characters with respect. We hoped that the readers would as well. And I remember when our friend Oscar Zarate was looking through the artwork, and he said, what is this? What is this? He's Argentinian, in case you don't recognise the accent. He says, this is not pornography. He says, nobody is frightened. And I think that that was true. Most pornography, I think Melinda's referred to it as convict porn. It would be perfectly all right if you're a convict. It's sort of, it's all about power. It's all about, yeah, the women have always got to look frightened because there's more of a frisson, you know. Yes, whereas in our experience, people having sex, they're generally enjoying it, generally. We wanted to make the people in this book look like they were having a good time. That it was something about pleasure and not about power and repression and oppression.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's something that comes through quite strongly in both your works, is that wanting to, that kind of desire to intervene in an existing genre or an existing artistic form. I mean, I'm thinking of there's a Cobweb issue where each Cobweb issue kind of takes on a different genre and a different style. There's one in particular where I think it's Eurydice, where it's detective fiction. And one of the things that happens there is that instead of the kind of macho male detective who kind of saves the girl at the end of the day, it's Cobweb. It's a strong female character, and then instead of the kind of kiss at the end between the man and the woman, it's between, well, it's a kind of a CPR, but between, but it's drawn to look like a kiss, isn't it?
Really
yes. But yes, so there's that attempt to kind of intervene in different genres. And do you think that process of engaging with the kind of previous forms and previous artists is something which is kind of particularly fruitful?
It's a lot of fun, and I mean, if you're doing something like Cobweb, you have to understand that with any of the American books, you've got to turn out something that satisfies you as an artist every month. All right, we'd sometimes have a little more leisurely schedule. on some of the ABC books. But so if you're doing an ongoing character, then you want to have fun with it. If it's not going to be fun for you, it's not going to be fun for the readers.
Yeah.
So we'd think, all right, what should we do with Cobweb next issue? Let's do something weird with collage, or, I mean, that was, I think, one of your ideas originally. Could we do something with collage? And I thought, well, maybe if I wrote something that was a bit like a surrealist novel to go along with it. We thought about Annie Fanny. We thought about how much, one of my favourites was when we decided that we really liked the kind of Little Archie style comics, and we also really liked Johnny Craig's sweaty, neurotic, anxious EC horror comics. And I thought, wouldn't it be funny if you just put those two styles together as two ways of, I mean, this is one of the great things about working with Melinda, is that she's incredibly versatile. Using, in Lost Girls, we'd got all the various pastiches that she was doing of Beardsley and Mukka and Sheila and all the rest of these. Great. It's nice to have an artist where you can say, yeah, can you make this page look a bit Johnny Craig? And it keeps it fresh. We did one that was done like, one of, I think, our favourites was done in the format of a newspaper strip, where that's great. Even as a writer, it's terrific, because at the beginning of every strip, which is like in the actual comic book, it's every 3 or 4 panels, you have to give a resume as if it was a real daily newspaper strip where they would give a resume of the previous work. So every 4 panels, I was giving a resume of everything that had happened before, and you'd have to bring it to a little punchline. It's very tight, and it puts demands upon you, and you get a piece of work that you wouldn't otherwise have come up with. So, yeah, it's, if you're going to be doing a lot of comics, to keep it fresh, you should steal from the past, from the future. I mean, I think that one of my favourite definitions, Théophile Gautier, the decadent author, was asked to define what decadence meant to him. And he said that basically a decadent writer should feel free to take from the most ancient mythologies and also from the most modern technical vocabularies, and should be able to stir all of this in together to get an incredible range of effects. And I think that that's really good advice. You know, it's so yeah, with Cobweb we were certainly indulging in that.
Absolutely, yeah. She was great fun. She was really sassy. Alan had mentioned to me when we first got together, in '89, he said, well, you could do your superheroine, and, with me writing it, it probably would be a seller. And so I started trying to draw generic characters. I couldn't get into it at all. I looked at the work of all the famous and popular, superhero comics. I've frankly never really liked superhero comics except for Watchmen, which I read before I met Alan. But anyway, I kept not getting the point, and he said, well, draw something that you like. And I said, okay, I know exactly what I like. Eve Arden from R. Miss Brooks, TV series from the 1950s, where as a lady teacher, she's smarter than everybody else in school. She's in love with a lab professor who's scared of her and would never go anywhere near her, and she's bossy and she's taller than everybody else, and she does what she wants. She's like a 500-pound gorilla. She sits where she likes, And I said, so okay, I've got her. I've got the 1940s thing because I love all that, and I was off, and we just had a ball. It was fun instead of work. She wasn't like anybody else's superheroine, but she suited my needs very much.
Absolutely. I mean, there should be more fun. There should be more evident fun.
And individuality is very, very important. When you're being creative, it is the purest form of play. It should always be about playing with something, and always make sure that it's something you want to do, and it will have your mark on it. It will be your baby. It will be your toy. It won't be, we all start out copying people that we admire, and then we start to draw it in, and little things that start out as flaws become character marks of our particular work. And the more you it is, the more wonderful it is.
Yeah, I mean, it's very much as one of William Blake's kind of artistic principles was that it's your point of weakness that allows the spiritual to come in. It's
Absolutely.
Not, he talked a lot about the strength of the line, but actually in terms of what allows divinity to enter the material world, it's coming through that weakness. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and I guess I've just been rereading some of your kind of super treatments of the kind of archetypal superheroes like Superman and Batman, and one of the things, and Miracle Man, Marvel Man as well, and one of the things that tends to come out there is that emphasis on vulnerability. So as opposed to kind of an icon of kind of military superiority and kind of an impermeable, inviolable self, you're kind of showing how superheroes are either vulnerable or how they just don't realize that they're vulnerable.
Well, I mean, I suppose that my feelings about the superhero have probably changed really, really drastically over the past sort of 30 years. I mean, initially when I was 7, I saw the superheroes as an incredible source of ideas and imagination. It wasn't that I wanted to be Superman and be able to beat up bullies. I was a pretty big kid, I could beat up bullies by myself, so it was just purely the imagination that they represented. And that was how I used to feel about them. That was the way that I tried to treat them. When I began working in the genre, I tried to think of new ways to use the characters, stuff like that. My feelings have changed since. I have become really, really cranky and embittered. And it's my current feelings about the superhero are that what they largely represent. This is after looking at a lot of the people working in the superhero field and realising that they've never formed a union. With the exception of 3 or 4 people, they have never answered back to their employers. They have never complained about the subhuman way in which they are treated. When the artists that they profess to admire are taken out and put to the wall, people like Jack Kirby, when he had had his artwork physically stolen from the Marvel Comics offices, just before they were going to have to legally give it back to him. Yeah, you know, these things happen, just a pure coincidence, I'm sure. Nobody said a word. And you start to see a bit of a gap, a credibility gap, developing between these costumed champions who always stand up for the oppressed, who always struggle against tyrants, who are always on the side of the underdog. Yeah, and then you've got the artists who draw them, who have never shown any courage at all. And you start to think, I'm not asking these people to defend the Earth against Galactus, should he turn up. I'm just asking them to stand up for their own wives and children. You know, you start to see the American superhero as a cowardice compensator, as people who will put up with their governments and their bosses doing almost anything to them as long as they can escape. into a fantasy where they are the Hulk or the Silver Surfer and nobody pushes them around. That is the negative side of the superhero, in that it becomes something which stands for its exact opposite. And that's a bit of a downer, isn't it? I wish I hadn't actually mentioned that now. But it's the way that I've ended up feeling about the superhero. That's not to say that at some point in the future I might not dabble in the genre again, if I can find some way of doing so in a way that entertains and interests me. But really it's the last thing that I'm thinking about at the moment. There is such a lot of wonderful material that does not involve people with their underpants outside their trousers. You know, there is a much wider universe out there, which I'm happy to explore.
Okay, well, I think kind of on that note, if you're happy to take some questions, we could open things up for general discussion. Are there any?
Have we got a microphone?
Yeah, there's microphones. There's a fellow up at the top. Up. Yeah.
Thank you. You kind of touched on it, or Alan's kind of touched on it a little bit, but I wonder if the pair of you could talk a bit about. You're talking about when one of the joys of comics and cartoons is almost getting under the radar, being able to do something satirical in a sort of a medium that people don't respect. And yet we're sat here in an art gallery, we're talking about your Lost Girls book, which was is a sort of beautiful art book, if you like. And do you feel, and you are the people within the medium who are talked about seriously, who are interviewed in the broadsheets, who are being broadcast on the internet now. Is there a problem there? Is there a problem for you as artists that you're no longer able to slip under? Are you in fact not considered as artists, and so you don't get the benefit of that kind of comic book which you may have benefited from earlier in your careers?
Well, I don't think we're magic exemptions. I don't know how it's quite worked. I think it's because we came up through comics, and so nobody cared about comics. So Melinda was able to do things like Frescoes or work in women's comics and anarchy comics because they were under the radar. I was able to do stuff in 2000 AD and my later work because it was under the radar. People weren't noticing. The thing is, by the time you've done something like Lost Girls, which, yeah, it's art, isn't it? It's very difficult to look at that and say, well, this isn't art. It's like, and nobody does anything. You know, I think our attitude is, well, if we were going to be in prison, we'd be there by now. So I'm not anticipating any trouble for anything we do in future, because we're not doing this to be provocative. We're not doing this to shock. We're doing this after a lot of thought in the way that we think it should be done. And we do seem to be in this position where nobody has objected to Lost Girls. I mean, I thought that was kind of remarkable. I wasn't expecting a witch hunt, but we were steeling ourselves for, all right, what if? You know, we'd started, if you take 16, 18 years to do something, then the world that you start the book in is going to be very, very different to the world that you finish the book in. During that 18 years, there were paedophile panics, there were obscenity uproars, so we had got no idea. When it was the Bill Clinton administration, we thought, hey, maybe this will be all right.
Everything was cool, yeah.
Then, of course, in 2000, it was the George Bush administration, and we thought maybe this might be all right. But somehow, because we beauty-proofed Lost Girls. We'd beauty-proofed it and we'd intelligence-proofed it.
Well, we we did a lot of safety catches, like Alan said. I mean, I made it as beautiful looking as possible. We threw in as much high culture as we could so that it would confuse our predators.
Yeah.
And make it a bit inedible, you know. All the references to, you know, artists and all the literary references, you know, people wouldn't be able to recognize what kind of animal it was. The pornographic aspect was kind of a subtext, and everybody kept saying, well, it's not a pornography, it's a pretty book, it's not dirty dolls, matter of fact, it's not dirty enough, you know, and Alan called it a pornography so that people could say nothing. That's the worst thing you could call it, so people would have to backtrack if they were going to do anything. But when I was going to go back to San Francisco, well, to San Diego, I was scared because I'd had somebody come up to me at a sci-fi fantasy convention, and I was drawing a picture of a cat girl who happened to be a bit nudish. And this man came up in a rage and said, "Do you mind? I have a child here. How dare you draw a picture of a, you know, partially nude cat woman?" You know, so I thought, okay, the housewives are going to be out there with handbags full of bricks, and my publisher, who is in Georgia. And this, I think, is an important thing to show you what the political atmosphere is like, or the sexual political atmosphere. When I was in San Diego, Chris Staros, our publisher, introduced me to a man from his home state, Georgia, who had a little comic shop in a small town there. And he had made the mistake of letting a young man sell a little comic with a picture of a naked Pablo Picasso on the front of it. And that poor store owner had been enmeshed in a trial about pornography for 2.5 years. No one in his town would talk to him or his wife. And the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund were set up to defend those kind of cases, and they were pouring money into this extended trial that went on and on and on. And I talked to this man, and I talked to his wife, and I asked her how she was feeling. She burst into tears and said, "We are completely isolated. No one will speak to us. It's as if we murdered someone." So in that atmosphere, in my publisher's state, he said to me, "Okay, well, I'm pouring money, all the extra money I can, into the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund on the off chance that Lost Girls puts us all in prison." And I didn't know till I got out there what was going to happen. We did try to beauty-proof it, but it could have gone very wrong, just like the pornography trial for Frescozizi's, which makes that comic still illegal in this country. I mean, so it's no joke when it happens.
It isn't any joke. I mean, one of the things that you can count on to a degree is that a common factor amongst all of the people who are trying to ban this kind of material is that you can generally count on the fact that they're not going to be very bright, really. So by insisting on calling it pornography all the way through, from its first serializations in Taboo or wherever it was, and right the way through to the book, we were saying, yeah, this is a work of pornography. The thing is, if we brought it out and said, yeah, this is a work of art, they'd have all said, no, it's not, this is pornography. So we said, yeah, this is a work of pornography. And before they could stop themselves, they said, no, it's not, this is art. Oh. That was pretty much what happened. It's sort of, you can kind of, you can false foot these people.
And of course we had to seal the book up. We had to make sure nobody looked at it in the stores. We had to make sure that people's IDs were checked, you know, and that's the other thing. So if somebody complains to us and said, well, my son or daughter read this, well, that must be because you bought it and they found it in your home, it is not our problem. So.
Yeah, and I mean, we actually said, yes, let's put for adults only, which is something that the majority of the comics industry, they really, really resist that. They put weaselly phrases like, suggested for mature readers, which is no defence under law. It is weaselly because what they're hoping, they think, all right, this is full of filth. But we don't want to lose out on those 11-year-olds. No, we don't want to put for adults only. No, we don't want to do that because we secretly do want children to read this because children have got money.
Yeah. And one of the things I noticed, my friend Jeff has a comic shop in Northampton where we live, and he showed me a comic. He said, I don't even think I want to carry this comic. One of the unattractive trends is not towards more graphic sexuality, but more towards kind of splatter stuff, horrible, stabby stuff, blood everywhere, families being mutilated and torn up, and these are sold as comics, and they're very disturbing, and I think it's not really a plot line. It's just blood and more blood, decapitation.
What we were saying earlier about the fact of, Lost Girls, that we'd initially thought, yes, maybe this will open a floodgate of quality pornography, but it didn't. In the same way that Watchmen didn't open a floodgate of quality superhero books. Quite the reverse in many ways. And that is because when I was doing Watchmen, I thought, what people will like, they'll see how clever the visual and verbal storytelling is. They'll see that there are all these effects which we're using that don't come straight from Will Eisner or Harvey Kurtzman. We've come up with some new ideas. Other people could come up with new ideas as well. But people see the work and they think, oh yeah, right, I see what's made this so popular. It's got more violence in it, and it's got more sex. Yeah, we can do that. And so that's what you get. You get 20 years of comics that are just frankly miserable, that are violent, horrible, in many cases repellent. There's not actually a reason for any of that stuff, and they haven't got, that's the only thing that they can take from your work. They think, oh, the explicitness, all right, this gives us the license to go further along our own particular sort of unpleasant trails of imagination. You can end up, with the best will in the world, licensing some unspeakable stuff in that people will say, oh, well, they did it in Watchmen, they did it in Lost Girls, so what's wrong with us doing our scenes of bestial slaughter? Well, what's wrong with that is that your scenes of bestial slaughter are frankly appalling, and they're not saying anything. They are just purely ugliness for its own sake, because presumably you can't think of any other ways to enhance interest in your stories. And that, unfortunately, is all too often what happens. Is there another question?
Yeah, are there... the gentleman down here, kind of 4 rows back, I think, in the centre there. Yeah, I can't quite see the haircut, but yes.
What do you not like about film translations from comic book to film? Because you didn't put your name to the Watchmen. I never read comic books when I was younger, and I used to watch films all the time. I was a film fan, animations, the whole thing. And I thought they were a translation, they were a modern way of, because films are storyboarded like graphic novels and stuff like that, and they are moved, it's like every picture is a separate picture of it's just really fast. Like when you flick a book and you can see the image moving along. moving pictures, you know what I mean? Why?
I am familiar with the concept. I would query the... see them all the time, don't you? Them moving pictures. I would query that the mistake you're making is that film storyboards are like comics. They're not. Film storyboards, they are, and anyway, film storyboards are a guide to the film, which is a completely different medium. There were things that I was doing in Watchmen which were, and in most of my comics books, they're designed not to be, they're designed to show off what the comics medium can do. They weren't designed to be films. Therefore, the only way that a film could be made, I mean, imagine, if you want to make yourself feel ill for a moment, imagine the film of Lost Girls. And yes, there were some suggested, and I left that entirely to Melinda. I said, well, I've made my position clear. I don't care if any of my contributors, or co-contributors, co-creators, if they want a film made, I'm not going to stop them. I just don't want my name on it, and they can have all the money. Melinda looked at the proposition and thought, oh no, if these pictures were moving, you know, and Lost Girls has got a tableau vivant quality about it. The figures are still. The audience is filling in the interleaved scenes, the bits between the panels, the movement. They're doing all that themselves. Whereas if it was a film, it would just be a grunting porn film like most of the others, with a few pretentious flourishes. It would. And it's like when they came to do the V for Vendetta, or let's say the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen film, or the V for Vendetta film, or the From Hell film, which I believe was at least one of the better. I've not seen any of these because, as I've pointed out, I do prefer to criticise things from a position of complete ignorance. but with From Hell, what had that got to do with my comic? I mean, From Hell is 600 pages long, including the appendices. It is utilising comic book story techniques. So what they did was a completely different story, which had got some characters from my book, which took me and Eddie Campbell 10 years to complete because we were researching it. They came up with a completely different story with the V for Vendetta film. There was a lot of the techniques which they couldn't reproduce, and they missed out all of the, I understand from people who have seen the film, they missed out all of the important kind of dialogue about violence and whether it's okay for someone to kill people just because they're the hero of a comic strip or movie. Why should somebody who's the title character, what, do they get a free pass? Whatever their behaviour is. We had quite a careful debate in that strip about, is it all right ever to use violence? And I think that we came down firmly on the side of, no, it's not. But sometimes people do. And all of that was missed out. Also, it was done as a direct response to the Margaret Thatcher years. It was done when the National Front were gaining, that was, for younger listeners, the National Front was what we used to call like the British National Party or the English Defence League or whatever they're called now. They were on the rise, Margaret Thatcher was in office. We were specifically responding to that. Whereas the American people making the film, they don't care about all that. They wanted to make it into a parable for 9/11. And, you know, make it a bit contemporary and, in fact, sort of about what had happened in America. Now, during the Thatcher years, when I wanted to comment upon that, I did a story that was like set in Britain. If they wanted to do something about 9/11, couldn't they have come up with their own story? Something like that? The thing is, what is the... Film is a medium. Yes, it's great. We're planning something at the moment. Something that has been written especially for film. Hopefully it'll be out by the end of the year. Adapting from one medium to another, I know that it's automatic and it's reflexive, but there's no reason for it other than to make money. And there's no reason for it other than if something has sold well in one medium, then let's make it into a film, let's make it into a television series, let's make it into a computer game, let's make it into a t-shirt, let's make it into a bubblegum card collection. Let's do all... Why? Well, because we'll make a lot of money out of it. There are no creative reasons whatsoever. And one of the problems with film, all right, we're doing film in a way that it's not costing very much. All right, it's about a 40-minute film. It'll cost us about £100,000. In context of hour-and-a-half Hollywood films, 2-hour Hollywood films that cost $300 million, I think we're being fairly frugal. And also, we are writing it specifically for cinema. My favourite films are ones that were written for cinema, like they used to be back in the old days. They weren't an adaptation of a comic book or a television series that everybody loved in the 1960s, or a television series that everybody hated in the 1960s, or, in the case of Pirates of the Caribbean, a Disneyland ride. And as I have said, we will live to see Johnny Depp playing Captain Crunch. Breakfast cereal mascots will be the next thing. I mean, it's like, yeah, I don't see... It might entertain people for a few minutes, but I'm not interested in it because it's not the story that I was trying to tell. And so therefore, if somebody's going, yeah, we're going to do a story that's got a few of your characters in, maybe, and some other characters that we've just thrown in because we felt like it, we've given it a different story because yours wouldn't really work for a movie audience, you know. In that case, why do it at all? Well, yeah, actually, I know why, because it's got the name of my work attached to it, and if I hadn't done an awful lot of struggling and cursing people in a very strict technical sense, I would have had to have had my name on the Watchmen film and the V for Vendetta film, and people would think, oh well, I've seen the film, I guess that was like the book. I'm really proud of my work. You know, I put a lot of attention and care into it. I certainly don't want people looking at the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen and thinking, oh yeah, I saw that thing with Sean Connery. No, I didn't like that. You know, and just confusing the two, which invariably happens in modern culture. So that's why I've got nothing against the film medium, although I would point out, if you want to be a comic artist or a comic writer, what you need is a biro and a piece of paper. If you plan to be somebody who works in the film medium, you are going to need a lot more than that. Which means that it's inevitably you've got to have money people involved with films. This is one of the things why it's taken us 2 years to get a deal whereby we are not being funded by people who want anything other than to just be involved in the film. We own everything. That's taken a long time. Most people can't do that. It's sort of, but that's a general problem, I think, with film. It is very costly, and it's not very easy to work in cinema. It's getting easier. It's getting easier. But I'd certainly say that there's no reason for adaptations. They, other than to make somebody, probably not their creator, a great deal of the money.
Yeah. Okay, are there other questions? Yeah, right there in the centre there.
Thank you. Quick question, and a slightly longer one. Quick question, is there any chance you'll ever finish Big Numbers? Slightly longer one for both of you. Have you got any advice or warnings for the artists and writers who are currently working on prequels to Watchmen for DC?
All right, for the first one I can answer really quickly. No. We tried, I had 2 artists run screaming into the night trying to get Big Numbers done. After a while you start to think, is it me? You know, we tried to even bring it back as a television series, but no. No, that was a long time ago. Its moment has passed. If it was going to work, it would have worked then. That's going to be my Edwin Drood, my unfinished one. It's a pity because I was, there was a lot of brilliant ideas in that book, you know, but that's the way it goes. As for my advice upon, no, I've got no advice now. If you'd have asked me before you started these things, I think you know what I'd have said. But you didn't listen, did you? So, no, they're on their own, I'm afraid. I mean, I did, assuming that there's somebody who's probably going to put this up on the internet, I did think up the, I thought slightly amusing phrase, who botches the Watchmen? So, you can have that.
Did you have any kind of thoughts as well, Melinda? Any advice to offer?
Well, I mean, it wasn't done to me, but I do enjoy seeing how the less than mighty do fall down on some of these things. I don't know whether you were going to mention anything about the Dr. D.
Oh yeah, we heard. I was talking the other day about with some of the people from Lex Records, and one of them was saying, because you may or may not know that I was approached by the popular music ensemble Gorillaz some 2 years ago. They wanted me to write an opera all about superheroes. And I said, well, there's no chance of me doing that. I really don't like superheroes. I don't want anything to do with them. And they said, oh, well, it could be about anything. It could be about, like, magic or something like that. And because I'm a bit vain and like to show off my huge amount of knowledge, I said, well, if you're going to do something about magic and you're talking about doing an opera, the obvious thing would be to do something about alchemy. Because opera actually began as a function of alchemy. Monteverdi was an alchemist. He created opera, you know, to express alchemical ideals. And I said, and if you're going to do something, if you're the Manchester Festival and you're going to do something about an alchemist, you should do it about John Dee, the great alchemist and magician, the man who invented the concept of the British Empire, and who was exiled to Manchester, where he basically designed Manchester. And they said, oh yeah, that's a great idea. And I said, well, I've got this underground magazine that's just started. Perhaps if you could do a short piece, maybe 4 pages and a cover, not an interview, but do something genuinely creative. And we're just trying to get this magazine going. That would be a real help. And anyway, we started on that basis. They said, oh yeah, we will gladly do that. And I said, right, I'll write your opera for you. And I'd got about a third of the way through it. I was running myself into the ground. And I said, oh, you know, just giving you a last reminder, you'll be all right to get that, the stuff that you promised for the end of the month. And then they said, oh, well, actually, we're overcommitted. We've got a lot of other projects. No, we probably won't be able to do that. At which point I said, oh, well, actually, I'm a bit overcommitted myself, so I won't be doing your opera. At which point they said, well, what are we going to do? And I said, well, it's rather your problem. I suggest you go back to your original idea of an opera about superheroes. There was just silence on the other end of the phone. I then said, I don't own the concept of Dr. D, and I don't own the concept of opera. So you could do your own Dr. D opera, couldn't you? And they said, yeah, we could. And I thought, oh, that was mean, suggesting that, wasn't it? It's sort of because they can't. And then I was hearing the other day that Tom from Lex was saying, oh, I hear that Damon Albarn and Jamie Hewlett are really falling out, and it's all over this John Dee opera, and everybody sort of who's reviewed the opera says it's really rubbish, it's getting terrible, terrible press. Says it's almost like somebody's cursed them. And I just went on eating my mozzarella starter. I pointed out that actually, yeah, the cursing business, it's a pretty simple trick, and it's been going on for thousands of years. What we witch doctors do, it's like we don't actually make the sun go away and bring it back during an eclipse. We don't actually do that. We just know what's going to happen. So I think that this probably explains pretty much my attitude to both Dr. D, the opera, and to the Watchmen prequels as well. Yeah, I'm not doing anything. I just know what's going to happen. You know, and the sun's going to go out.
There was a question from a gentleman just off to my left of our last questioner in the light-coloured shirt there. Right. Back.
Hi, Alan, Melinda. Thanks for coming. You mentioned earlier something about complexity. You made a few predictions. I don't know if you'd refer to that as Moore's law, but I was wondering if in this age where we have a lot of technology and a lot of social and political complexity, one of the most easy ways to access comics is via the web. So I wondered, what are your thoughts on web comics as a medium? What similarities and differences do they have to your own work? What advantages and disadvantages? And what would you like to see more or less of in them?
Well, I've thought about this a bit.
Have you seen any?
I've seen, I mean, like, I've seen, basically what most comics on the internet are just simply bog standard comics that have been uploaded onto the internet. They're different in that they read in a different way, but it's the same stuff. It struck me when I first heard about it that you would probably be able to do quite a lot of different things if you actually thought about it as a different medium. That there'd be possibilities for sound, maybe mild animation, special effects. I mean, my daughter and son-in-law, Leah and John, were working on a thing for Channel 4 called The Thrill Electric, which I think was about the first properly funded webcomic that was actually utilising some of the possibilities. I think that probably for the more pyrotechnic forms of comics, I'm talking mainly about superheroes, that yes, the addition of bits of animation, special effects, soundtracks, these could be used interestingly to come up with something new that isn't quite a comic, but might be very interesting in its own right. I think that it's limited in terms of its application to comics, in that actually I think that the comic book printed on the page in its simple form is a higher technology than any electronic form. That, as an example that I was using earlier when I was talking about, you imagine a Will Eisner page. It's perhaps a silent page, largely about atmospherics. Imagine one panel where you've got, say, the spirit or one of his characters in the background looking through a dark house, and in the foreground you've got a tap, a faucet, and it's got an elongated bead of water under it. Now, if you were looking at that with an eye to how can we enhance this for some kind of e-publication, then it's obvious. I mean, yeah, we can have the tap really dripping, and we can have it going drip, 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 drip on the soundtrack. The image is doing that already. By having an elongated bead of water, your mind is saying, oh, that bead of water looks like it's just about to drip, and then I bet another one will form, and I bet it will sound like this. You're doing all that in your mind. It's not really an enhancement. In fact, I think that the effect of a work of art, any work of art, is kind of proportional to how much work you are having to do as the reader, the viewer, whatever. I think that art that washes over you, that is doing everything for you, is not really very enjoyable. You're contributing nothing. You're just sitting there passively and letting the art wash over you. If it's a painting, you should be able to engage with that painting, see what it looks like from your perspective. What do you think it means? If you're reading a book, then you're creating all of the characters and what they look like. You're creating all of the landscapes and the sets, the characters' voices. You're doing all of that. Whereas the more that is done for you, the more that you're kind of in an infantile state, where you're just... I'll tell you who I blame for many of the wrongs in modern society. I blame the manufacturers of children's cot mobiles in the 1970s, because they are the people who have taught several generations now that, oh, it's moving, it's making a noise, I must be entertained. You know, there's got to be more to it than that. It's because, yeah, movies can be great. My favourite movies are the ones that leave you to do most of the work in your own head.
Well, there's a thing in painting, and I've just kind of learned to discover this gradually because I didn't go to art school, but in painting, the eye enters the picture through a pathway that you create. You inform your viewer where to focus. The eye moves around effectively around that focus area, and then there is another exit in the painting. So there's effectively an entrance and an exit, much like in a house. In books, as Alan pointed out to me when I was doing my autobiography, you can't have all the opinions for everyone who's going to read things. You have to tell them what you feel is necessary to give your characters color and form and opinion. But you can't tell your reader, hate this person or love this person. You give them the information, you let them make their decisions, you know. And so things like, films like, well, Avatar, for instance, where it's all done for you. It's like a video game, but you don't have any buttons for it. Like you're saying, or I mean, I'm a bit of a game head. You know, I was really addicted to Tomb Raider, although I'm really terrible at it. So I have to do it hundreds of times, but I just wanted to see the little animation work. I wanted to see her jump over the fence and stuff. But even in that, it doesn't leave you with anything. It leaves you exhausted and cranky, and you have not contributed anything. You haven't thought, I love that character. I don't know whether that writer even knew what they were doing, but I love that character, you know. Or I love that painting because it's got that moment. It's got that moment between this happening and that happening, that sky that looks like it's going to have a thunderstorm, that shepherd with a concealed, you know, knife who's sneaking up on a woman who's sleeping with a sheep. You know, that pregnant moment that never actually occurs, but is about to occur.
Yeah, well, I think that this is the thing about interactivity. Yeah, I think that the normal way of interacting with art is what we've just been talking about. You interact with a painting on a one-to-one level. You interact with the book that you're reading. When they talk about interactivity in art, it becomes something like, yeah, you can choose your own way through this adventure. You can choose your own ending. Now, I'm perhaps a hardliner on this, but yeah, if you're going to choose your own ending, why not choose your own beginning as well while you're at it? And in fact, like, come up with a book or something. It is not the job of, we're not, as serious writers or artists, we're not supposed to be giving the readers what they want. We're supposed to be giving the readers what they need. If they'd done the old Curiosity Shop as an interactive narrative, who would have killed little Nell? You'd have to be a monster, wouldn't you? So little Nell would have lived, and the old Curiosity Shop would have been rubbish. You know, it's sort of, the author knows best. And if they don't bother reading their books. They're a rubbish author. But if you respect them, then they have got a certain effect in mind that they want to share with you. They don't want it to be a democratic thing. They have got something that they wish to say. The fact that you might have wanted this character to end up in a better position or this one in a worse one, it's not up to you. It's not up to me if I am the reader of a piece of work. You more or less, it's a thing about trusting the author and the artist. That's why they are authors and artists. It's because they have, in the past, have done things that have spoken to people. And that's why their work is enjoyed. I think you have to trust them. So I suppose the short answer to your question is that, yeah, there may be forms in which you can do really interesting things. But at the moment, I think that it tends to be largely, it's not been thought about yet to a significant degree to actually express it in whatever its perfect form might be. And it's kind of, at the moment, being used, if anything, to sort of propagate a kind of increasing cultural laziness that where we do less and less. And yes, we might get the chance to choose our own ending. Does it go this way or that way? But it's a meaningless decision. So as the audience and the artist both end up disempowered. I'm not saying that that's a uniform criticism of all possible e-comics in the future. I'm just saying that that is a big danger of them. And for the moment, I think that actually probably just standard print on paper is a far superior technology.
Right. Okay, we're coming. Well, we're past 9 o'clock. But are you? Should we draw things to a close? Are you happy for a couple more questions?
A couple more questions, yeah.
Yes, sometimes
okay.
that. Yeah.
Right. The woman in the second row there. Yeah. Yeah.
How do you? How do we remove the term artist from the art world? And I'm talking about art world as in any form of creativity, to open it up to people who don't feel as if they're artists, who feel that artist is a barrier to their own creativity, to allow people to be empowered and use their creativity to question their environment and their surroundings, especially in the current political climate.
Sorry, I'm not sure I quite understand. Are you saying how do you help people feel empowered artistically? Is that what you were asking?
I think so, yeah. I was thinking about the term artist and how it's certainly the people that I come into contact with find that a barrier to their creativity. I'm not an artist, I'm not creative. Whereas within their entire being, they might be creative, but they find the term artist a complete barrier to allowing themselves that creativity. You were talking earlier on, you were both talking earlier on about about art is realising and reaffirming your prejudices, but it's also about speaking mind to mind and heart to heart.
Yeah.
So how do we almost allow people that
You're saying that,
artists.
that it's like that the word artist itself has got such an aura around it that it sort of prevents it. To some people, they may be creative, but they don't think of themselves. The word artist gets in the way, or the word writer gets in the way. They think,
or
well,
sculptor, or
I like
comic
writing, but I'm not really a writer, or I like doing this, but I'm not really an artist. I think that we need to change the way that we think about things like writer or artist. I mean, when I'm approached by people saying, how do you become a writer? I tell them, you write every day. And then you're a writer. If you're asking me, how do you become a commercially successful writer? I don't know. You write every day. And if you do that, you'll get better and better and better and better.
It's
not an obstacle. Anybody could do it if they want to.
I mean, Alan encouraged me to publish my diaries because, I actually just kept a diary because I just found life so interesting, and I didn't want to forget the things the people that I'd met, the things they'd said, the places I'd been. I suppose I thought someday I'm going to be old and I won't remember who I am, and if these books are lying around, at least I'll have something to read, and maybe somebody will come by and say, oh, you wrote that, But, and then he said, well, these are really interesting. You're writing about really interesting people, and I have no training, and I say to all sorts of people, you've got an interesting life. I would say that to anybody. You've got an interesting life. Write down the things you're talking about, and day by day, step by step, you are becoming a writer, because that word is the sum total of a thing that you do on a regular basis. An artist is a person who likes to make things. I don't see the difference between someone who's a fine craftsperson or anybody who likes to do stuff with their hands and their eyes and their minds. And they do that on a regular basis to the point where they have enough of it so that they end up either showing people stuff, or someone comes in and prevents them from throwing the stuff away because it seems to be littering their life. It isn't about being one of those people that makes lots of money and has impossible temper tantrums and is seen getting drunk everywhere and earns millions. That's not it. It's the thing that you do. It's like being a shoemaker, or it's like being someone who paints walls for a living. It isn't any more glamorous than that. It's just that thing you do. It shouldn't have any aura around it. It's just an honest human occupation.
And I mean, say, to my mind, probably the greatest human being that ever lived, potentially. Possibly, and certainly one of the greatest artists and poets, that'd be William Blake. Now, William Blake, during his lifetime, he never made a sale. He got one review of his work which said, Mr. Blake is obviously an unfortunate lunatic. But he didn't care. He was William Blake. He didn't care whether anybody else knew that he was William Blake. Why should that bother him? He was William Blake. This is the thing. You are what you say you are. You don't have to wait for someone to say, oh yeah, you can be a writer now, or you can be an artist. We'll give you the badge and the Blue Peter pencil and all the rest of it, you know, and now you're a proper artist. Or you just say, you make the decision.
Yeah.
And it's like when I decided that I was going to become a magician, you know, what makes you a magician then? Yeah, well, because I say so. And that is exactly the same as, yeah, what makes you an artist? What makes you a writer?
It's a childish decision that, I mean, so much of everything to do with being creative is insisting on retaining that play relationship with life and the materials that you're given with life. When I was 8, I decided, well, I'm going to be an artist. First of all, it means that I don't have to do anything else, and it's the only thing I'm good at. And it doesn't matter how old I get, because as long as I'm doing something interesting, then I'll have friends, you know. Yeah. And yeah, you decide. The thing that stops people from enjoying their lives, one of the things is this idea that we need permission. No one else cares what we do as long as we're not hurting anybody. Everybody's busy with their own lives. You are the king or queen of your universe. The most important realms we have are up here. This is the shop floor where we all have to get along, and this is the personal universe where all things are possible and where nobody else has access unless we give it to them. It is the private kingdom, the great kingdom.
Yeah.
You don't need permission to make your kingdom the best. You can.
Yeah, and it's not like, I mean, artist and writer and magician, I believe all these mean the same thing, basically. I think that any creative art is a magical act. But we don't have to have permission. We don't have to get O-levels. We don't have to go to school. I don't know a single writer or artist who's ever had any formal education in those things.
I have a degree, therefore I am. No, that's not the way it works. I am, therefore I am.
Yeah, but it's purely a matter of having confidence in yourself. And that doesn't mean that, oh, everything I do is brilliant. Far from it. You've got to have a keen eye for your own flaws. That doesn't mean that you should beat yourself up, but you think, I could have done that better, next time I will do. And gradually you will progress. It's just what you do. You shouldn't have this vision of the artist or the writer as some kind of divine figure. I know that that's what a lot of artists and writers would prefer you to think of them as, but sort of, no, they're human beings.
And most of them come up from no place, not from great pedigreed families. They come up with a passion and are often considered odd and bizarre, don't have many friends, often. You know, drawing was my best friend when I was a kid. That's why I sat in my room and did it. I made fun of the kids who picked on me or whatever, and then started to notice, well, I'd like to get a bit better at this, you know. And as Jean Cocteau said, and I think this is a very nice way to think of all this, the artist is like an oyster with a constant grain of sand inside it. And because of that irritant, it makes a pearl. So very often the things we don't like in life, we make a pearl around it. We make art to keep us sane from a world where we can't make it right out there, but we can make it right in here.
And we can process our reality, we can process our experience, which, when we were talking about complexity earlier, the fact that, yes, it's a more complex world, we've got more experience to process. Art is a great way of doing that. And sort of, it should be, I believe that most people have probably got creative energies within them that are just not developed because they've not been encouraged to develop them for this reason or that. I mean, and I think that one of the most poisonous things is the celebrity aspect and the commercial aspect. I'll get people come up to me and they say, you know, how do I become a writer? And sometimes they'll be genuine, but sometimes in the very way that they phrase that question, you think, right, I mean, obviously the answer to that question is you write. So asking me, how do I become a writer? You want to know how you get to becoming a writer without the writing bit in it. You want the idea of the writer. Someone sitting there, they're probably going up the Amazon, sitting at the front of the boat, they've got a straw hat on, they've got their quill pen in one hand, they'll occasionally come up with an image and write it down. Yeah, that's being a writer and being known as a writer and being a famous, celebrated writer. You know, I mean, as Melinda knows now, but it's like with writing, you're on your own in a room. It's not a glamorous life. It's sort of, you're on your own with yourself, and you have to like your own company. You have to like your own mind. It's sort of, that's what writing is. It's not the celebrity bit of it. If that's what you're in writing for, then you're probably not a very good writer. You're probably not in it for the right reasons, you know. So, you know, that's...
All the things about art is being alone in a room with that thing that you're going to have start having a conversation with, and then you're going to fall in love with it, and then you're going to have your first spat, and then you're going to be in tears, and you're going to be angry, and then you'll have a bit of a breakthrough, and then you'll have a tender conversation again, and it'll go all right for a while, and then you'll be in tears again, and it's all you in that room.
Yeah, and certainly, no, if a word like artist or writer has achieved a kind of an off-putting aura around it that is stopping you becoming yourself, then that's not what art should be doing.
That's a song and dance that business makes up to try to put a glamour around, you know, artists so that they will earn more money. That's the medicine show. Yeah. That's not the process.
No. Yeah, just get out there and do your art, and don't worry about what the labels are.
And if you say, I'm an artist, or I'm a writer, or I make this, or I do that, and somebody says, no you don't, no you can't. I mean, I had a friend years ago, we used to get into knockdown, drag-out fights about whether I had the right to draw the things that I did because she thought my art made her sick, and she thought that other people should never have to look at it. And she said, you have no right to have this world that you're forcing on people. And I said, well, they can walk away. It's my world. I'm not going to stop doing it because somebody might not like it. You know, like I say, this is private, personal.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think we've got time for one more quick question.
Yeah.
There's a woman right here at the front. Yeah.
I was wondering where you feel underground comics and art can really exist now, because you have such a huge corporate presence, and it seems to me like the only place where you can really circumvent all of that is on the internet with webcomics, but you don't seem to feel very optimistic about that. So I was wondering, do you feel like it's even possible to have real subversive art anymore?
Are you asking Alan?
No,
both of you.
Generally about you.
Presence.
Just to the underground. I mean, sort of, is it possible to actually be subversive at an underground level now that we're global superstars? Is that the general gist? That simplified it a bit, I know.
It's for, like, in general, do you think subversive underground art can exist? Not just specifically your work, although I would imagine that'd be a bit difficult for you as well.
I don't. One of the problems about living where we live and working where we do is, as you get older, you get this kind of momentum building up where you just keep producing more and more of your own stuff, And I think the biggest problem for both of us is we don't see an awful lot of what other people are doing. I would not like to say in ignorance that you know, I don't see much that is subversive. I see autobiographical work. I don't see, I mean, I think the most subversive thing to do would be to talk about how we are being turned into cattle, you know, by corporations, by the education system, by the war machine, by, you know, handfuls of oil and money millionaires and billionaires who run the planet. There was a time when underground meant sexually subversive. We've gone way past that. What we want is genuine politics. I mean, Brought to Light, that Alan worked on, was very, very subversive. I mean, the American government now, for one thing, they have really become very fascist. And I don't really know whether anyone is doing anything in comics that even approaches addressing the fascism that is America now.
I think I can see what you're saying in that it becomes more difficult, doesn't it, to actually subvert anything when, in order to subvert something, there has to be a structure there to subvert. And increasingly, in the modern... Oh, am I booming a bit? Is that my outdoor voice?
The author god,
okay,
yes.
Okay. I think that that basically... Hang on, I'm thrown now. What was I...
It's more difficult to subvert things.
Yes, it's more difficult to subvert things because things are more chaotic. There's less structure in society or the world. How do you subvert a whirlwind? You know, how do you subvert an explosion? That is a problem. But I believe that what you need to do, you have to be more selective in your choice of targets. You have to look at the big underlying things that are fundamental and that no one's thought of changing. Choose your targets carefully. I mean, what with Lost Girls, we thought, all right, nobody's actually venturing into this area. Nobody is trying to change the perceptions of this area. That's a really good tip, actually. Go for the areas that nobody's interested in. Because very often they will be really big, fundamental, important areas that just aren't fashionable. Magic seemed like an interesting, neglected area where nobody who had got any intellectual self-esteem would have anything to do with magic, just the same as nobody would have anything to do with pornography. If there are people avoiding an area, that's probably a good sign that there's a reason for that it's probably significant. Those are the areas where you probably can still successfully actually try to subvert people's ideas. But I think that, yeah, as the world becomes more fractal and more chaotic, it's subverting itself. It's breaking itself down as it goes along, and that becomes a difficult process to subvert. I think subversion is still possible, but I think you do just have to choose your areas more carefully and work from there.
Right. Okay. Well, that sounds like a very optimistic, in fact, note to round things off on. So I'll just ask you to thank Melinda, and Alan. This is
And can I say a quick thank you as well, again to Matt for doing an admirable job of chairing.